All right, my babies. This is supposed to be cool. Assessing risk 6.3. So what we've done so far is analyze the current state and we define the future state. And so the main thing I got from defining the future state is basically just how like when you're trying to build a strategy, you really have to. Your strategy is literally how you're moving from one place to another. And so you have to know where you are or where you're going. And now we're assessing the risks so that at the very least, how we go kind of has more weight or more responsibility in ways that don't necessarily like lead to something disastrous. And that's the assess risk part. So the purpose of assess risk is to understand the undesirable consequences of internal and external forces on the enterprise during the transition to or once in the future states. Okay. An understanding of the potential. Again, like it's just a lot of words to explain. Like, there's something we will not like, whether it's because of internal shit or external shit, and basically how the enterprise kind of basically move through it. Understanding of the potential impact of those forces can be used to make a recommendation about a course of action. Description: assessing risk includes analyzing and managing them. Risks may be related to the current state, a desired future state, a change itself, a change strategy, or any tasks being performed by the enterprise. The risks are analyzed for the possible consequences of the risk occur, impact of those consequences, likelihood of the risk, and potential time frame when the risk might occur. So, what are the possibilities of this risk occurring? What are the impact of these of the risk and the consequences of actually the risks? What's the likelihood? First, the possibility and the likelihood. Now, possibility is something, but like it's possible it might rain, but if I actually like it might rain in Lebanon, for example, I'm using a country. But if I go up to the mountain, the likelihood of it raining increases. But if I stay in the actual city, the likelihood decreases simply because of different pressure points and that it's cooler over there, so it's more susceptible to clouds and stuff like this. And potential time frame, well, I'm not explaining it to you guys, I'm explaining it to me. I'm approaching this as if I have no idea what's going on. That's why like most of the words are kind of like mumbo jumbo when you understand them. But at first I was like going after them, like what did they mean? Potential time frame when the risk might occur. Again, the collection of risks is used as an input for selecting or coordinating a change strategy. The risk assessment can include choosing to accept a risk if either the effort required to modify the risk or the level of risk outweighs the probable loss. So you might decide to actually take the risk as it is and like still go for it if whatever you're coming out of it has a lot more value or something about the effort, basically the movement towards it, what might actually like if we're going towards something and it's very risky, we're also calculating how we got to move towards it, which is added value. It's not necessarily the value that we would have wanted for the outcome, but it's still value that we can use. The value, exactly, the effort required to modify the risk or the level of risk outweighs the probable loss. And if the risks are understood and the change proceeds, then the risk can be managed to minimize their overall impact to value. So that's what I talked about in an earlier video. It's literally because you're going in the direction, but you know like something might go wrong. And if it goes wrong, as you're moving, you're actually developing a strategy for you to kind of like move in a different direction in case something happens that's like off or something like this. Important. Here they say important. So I'm gonna give it one of those red ones. Da, 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 da. The number of methods include positive risk is a way of managing opportunities, although a formal definition of risk in the BABOK guide doesn't preclude this usage. Opportunities are captured as needs and managed accordingly. The risk is used for uncertain events that can produce negative outcomes. So, so there's something that we could call a positive risk that here they're describing as a way to actually manage opportunities. There is no formal definition. It still is actually defined as a risk, but what we get out of it is what we get out of it is basically what we want to get out of it and how we perceive its activation is ultimately what we end up kind of like keeping as a form of value. What are the inputs? Business objectives, elicitation results confirmed though, influences, potential value, and requirements prioritized. Remember prioritized requirements in the previous chapter, chapter 5, right? And the requirements lifecycle management. So these are the inputs, influences, external, internal, elicitation result, confirmed, designs prioritized, requirements prioritized, business objective, and potential value. Guidelines and tools, business analysis approach, business policies, change strategy, current state description, future state description, identified risks, and stakeholder engagement approach. That's a whole lot of information, man. So I want you to really imagine, because most of the outputs here are basically the tasks using this output are the managed stakeholder collaboration, which is basically 2 chapters back, which means everything we're doing is kind of like happening in a way synchronously while we're conducting something, we're conducting something else. Ultimately, when you start with a project, you're probably just kind of like putting in as much as you can or whatever information you get and planning most of the shit because it seems like chapter 2 and 3 do not get any input from anything else from the outside unless we actually like see some change because of like the other things, because of like elicitation. Well, they are getting input then. So fuck it, never mind. Everything is used everywhere. Keep that in mind. So what are the elements? Unknowns. When assessing risk, there will be an uncertainty in the likelihood of it occurring and the impact if it does occur. So business analysts collaborate. So basically a risk is something that might happen or might not happen. So like what are the unknowns that we're not really like familiar with in order for us to kind of like see if it's worth like researching, studying or not. Business analysts collaborate with stakeholders to assess risks based on current understanding. Even when it's not possible to know all that will occur as a result of a particular change strategy, it is possible to estimate the impact of unknown or uncertain events or conditions occurring. Business analysts consider the historical context from similar situations to assess risk. We look at something from the past, we kind of like research things differently. The lessons learned from past changes and expert judgment from stakeholders assist business analysts in guiding the team and deciding the impact and likelihood of risks for the current change. So keep in mind, as a business analyst, you are researching to see what kind of risks there are, but like the people you're working with, your stakeholders, actually have some form of understanding of the risks directly. So constraints and assumptions, the dependencies can be analyzed for risks and sometimes should be managed as risks themselves. Imagine constraints could actually be risks because you're risking pulling constraint or pushing on something that might come with you. The constraint assumption or dependency is related to the aspect of a change. It can be related as a risk by identifying the event or condition and consequences that could occur because of the constraint/assumption or dependency. Negative impact to value. Risks are expressed as conditions that increase the likelihood or severity of a negative impact to value. So ultimately, a risk is something that impacts negatively the value that we're trying to get out of it. So business analysts clearly identify that express each risk and estimate its likelihood and impact to determine the level of risk. Business analysts estimate the total risk level from the aggregated set of risks. So we basically we create a leveling system like high risk, low risk, medium, and stuff like this, indicating the overall potential impact of the risks being assessed. In some cases, overall risk level can be quantified in financial terms because we're probably working with financial stuff, or in the amount of time, effort, or other measures. So some risks actually might delay us, some risks might actually require more resources, some risks might actually just kind of require money or lose money or something like this. Risk tolerance. How much uncertainty a stakeholder or an enterprise is willing to take on in exchange for potential value is referred to as risk tolerance. In general, there are 3 broad ways of describing attitude towards risk. Risk aversion, an unwillingness to accept each uncertainty. There may be a preference to either avoid a course of action which carries too high a level. So risk aversion is basically, all right, so that's basically 3 types. That's the attitude. Like risk aversion means avoiding risk, and some people might pay a price for avoiding risk, whether it's financial, whether it's monetary, whether it's time, or whether it is effort. They're okay as long as they kind of like avoid the risks that are required. Think about it from this way: like if we want to move forward in something and there's like a certain level of uncertainty that people don't want to actually enter in, they'll hire external consultants. So business analysts basically are working to change, and then external consultants to kind of verify that that change will not come with a risk. Neutrality, some people go like some level of risk is acceptable, and as long as basically the course of action is working, or at the very least is going somewhere positive. And some people are risk seeking, are willing to accept even take on more risk in return. So notes, an individual or organization may exhibit different risk tolerances at different times. Okay, if there is low tolerance for risk, there may be more effort on avoidance, transfer, and mitigation strategies. If the tolerance for risk is high, more risks are likely to be accepted. Typically, the highest level of risks are dealt with no matter what the risk tolerance level is. So basically, like some people kind of like approach risk in different moods, maybe. Recommendation. Like, yeah, so like to explain it better, man, it's just kind of like maybe they're willing to risk a lot more at the beginning of the project and not in the middle of it or at the end of it. Maybe they're willing to risk a lot more in the research stage in order to get like certain information that might actually support the project instead of actually like right like risk more money if something doesn't work out like but like ultimately like we each measure risk differently and at different points in time risk kind of like has a different value. Based on the analysis of risks, business analysts recommend a course of action. Business analysts work with stakeholders to understand the overall risk level and their tolerance for risk. The recommendation usually falls into one of the following categories. Pursue the benefits of change regardless of the risk. Pursue the benefits of change while investing in reducing risk. So here basically we're talking about how recommendations kind of fall. So with either pursuing the benefits of a change regardless of the risk, we either pursue the benefits of a change while investing in reducing risk, likelihood, or impact, or we're seeking out ways to increase the benefits of a change to outweigh the risk, or identifying ways. This one's nice because ultimately what you're doing is you're like, okay, so like if we're doing this, then what we let us see how much more we can get out of it, knowing full well that it's a risky endeavor. And that's what I talked about earlier. It's kind of like in the process of like figuring something out, you're actually learning a lot, and that could be applied in different places. So identify ways to manage and optimize opportunities, and do not pursue the benefits of a change. Like if we're not prone to risk taking, then ultimately what we're doing is we're like, oh, it's risky. We don't want to do anything about it. So stop. If the change proceeds with risks, stakeholders should be identified to monitor the risks and consequences if risk event occurs. So ultimately, documentation from their side as well is important in order for us to kind of like not shoot ourselves in the foot. The risk may alter the current state of the enterprise and require revision of the change strategy. A plan of action is in this case, may be developed before the risk materializes. And what are the guidelines and tools? Business analysis approach. So ultimately, like here, they're talking that risk may alter the actual plan. So we kind of have to, the change strategy itself, which we're getting to in the next basically subchapter 6.4. The change strategy itself is literally just about us kind of like is us incorporating everything in our movements. And when it comes to risks, how we act, what are the options to dealing with risks if they actually are like huge or something? What are the guidelines and tools? Business analysis approach, business policies, change strategy, current state description. Notice that this feeds into the change strategy, but the change strategy also feeds into this. So current state, this is a mental like thing that you have to kind of like do. There's a certain connection. I wonder if there's a chart that kind of connects everything that's connected to everything while we're actually like doing business, while we're doing business analysis. So current state description provides the context and yeah, future state description, identified risks, and stakeholder engagement approach. The stakeholder engagement approach is basically the plan that we do in order to approach stakeholders. So that's actually like one of the guidelines and tools because like ultimately we're talking to stakeholders and we're figuring shit out. And what are the techniques? Brainstorming, business cases, decision analysis, document analysis, financial analysis, interviews, lessons learned, mind mapping, risk analysis and management, root cause analysis, root causal analysis. Yeah, I like it. Root cause analysis are basically the core of why something might happen. So maybe to avoid the risk, you kind of like change entirely your fucking plan, but you're still going to the same goal. Survey or questionnaire and workshops. And who are the stakeholders? The main subject matter experts, implementation subject matter experts, operational support, project managers, regulators, sponsors, suppliers, and testers. And what are the outputs? Risk analysis results, which is basically an understanding of the risk associated with achieving the future state and the mitigation strategies in which they use to prevent those risks reduce. So the mitigation strategies in which will be used to prevent those. This is basically ultimately the purest form of why we do this. To prevent those risks, reduce the impact of risk, reduce the likelihood of risk occurring. Yay, and we're done. Chapter 6.4, defining state, defining strategy, defining the change strategy. We're here finally, right?